All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the UE St. Augustine Faculty of Law Research Seminar Series. This is our launch day, so I'm very excited. This initiative is really here to help everyone who attends develop their research skills. So whether you are a student interested in research, whether you're an early career researcher such as myself, trying to figure out how to progress in the academic world, or whether you're an established researcher, this series is for you. I must thank everyone who shared my post on LinkedIn, because through this, I was able to get many speakers volunteering who generously will be giving up their time and sharing their expertise over the course of this semester. In fact, the response has been so great that I'm starting to organize for the next academic year. I must also thank our Dean in encouraging me with this initiative. And of course, I must thank our ATS staff, without whom nothing would really be possible, because they are a small team, but very mighty and work extremely hard in everything. For today's session, we're going to kick off with creating a research plan. Our Dean, Professor Raphael Heffron, who joined the faculty in November, will be starting with this. I will then be talking about organizing your research. This recording will be placed on YouTube, on the faculty's YouTube page, and the information for this will be shared once it is uploaded. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to our Dean. He is going to speak for a period of 20 minutes, followed by 10 minutes for questions. I then will also speak for a period of 20 minutes, followed by 10 minutes for questions. So Dean, I could spend all day listing your various degrees and accomplishments, but I think what we really want to hear is how you go about, organizing a research plan, because you have the experience that's going to translate into a very useful talk today. So I now hand it over to you, Dean.
Okay, thank you very much, Emma, and it is a great initiative to see started off, and it's very good news to hear that you're already planning for next term, such has been the interest. It's good also to see the number of participants going up, so already at 67, and that is very good for the start of our research seminar series at the University of West Indies, St. Augustine. So I'm going to talk today about creating a research plan. And let's bear in mind that these are my views, my experience, and they should be taken as that. And I'll be free, obviously, to answer any questions at the end. So in terms of creating a research plan, one of the first things I want to mention is, research today is changing. More and more, when we think about research in terms of a university context, we see people being assessed more and more about their research performance. And we can already see this across the University of West Indies, where we can see this internationally as well. We also need to think that more and more academics as lecturers are being asked about research-led teaching. So when they are teaching students, that there is a big focus on, well, how are they developing that course? Are they doing research in that particular area? And there is this view that if you are to be, let's say, at the top of the game, as it were, in terms of teaching, that you should be supplementing that by being a good researcher in that topic. And again, we see that in terms of recruitment of staff at universities, being asked to have that sort of combined knowledge of both research and teaching expertise, and that there is some overlap between what you're doing in terms of your research and what you're doing in terms of your teaching. And we can even think that this is also applicable to professionals, legal professionals, that you can see a degree sometimes of confidence that if you have a professional who is also writing about a particular topic that they are, let's say, practicing in, there are benefits in terms of an increased view maybe around the credibility of that person, to take on a particular file or brief. So it is something to watch out for, whether you are thinking of the research way of life or thinking of a professional career. A final point I want to make in terms about research is changing is around data. Let's say we do live in this data-driven society. And for me, we can't pretend anymore that research is not being impacted by data. So you can see here the classic case of the ostrich, with its head in the sand. And for me, in all walks of life, we are all contributing to data metrics. I could ask the question, how many of you have a store card for a supermarket? All your data, everything you buy is being recorded by that supermarket. They know all your habits, whether you, let's say, eat too much pizza, drink too much Coca-Cola. They know all the data. Again, you think of other platforms, from those who use LinkedIn for work to those who use other social media, from TikTok to, let's say, Instagram, Facebook, all those, Google, everything relies on data. And for researchers to proceed and think that research isn't following this trend around data, to me, let's say that is somewhat naive. If we see these data trends in every other area of our life, we can only expect that it's going to happen in a big way in our academic lives, and in particular in our research lives. And in this context, my view would be that we should demand more from our own work as researchers. We should no longer be willing to, let's say, give away our research to just any publishing house. And you can see that in our daily lives. You don't take a store card from every single place. You don't join every single social media application. You choose a few and you stick with those, the ones you maybe more enjoy, because you actually get something out of it. And in a similar way, my view would be, when you're thinking about your research, you have to be really thinking about, what am I going to get out of publishing with this journal, this magazine, this newspaper? And that's the key question, the motivation. You don't just want to publish something for the sake of publishing it, and no one's going to read it, and it's going to be sitting online somewhere that's nearly totally inaccessible. And in this context, we talk about more and more in research, we talk about impact factors of journals, citations of academics, and all these are spreading into research. And for me, in a very simple way, I know it's a very complex area, but whether you are, let's say, thinking about doing more research, you're thinking about writing more, you're thinking maybe about that first article, or maybe you're a bit more established, you should be looking at journals that have some impact factors. And the idea is, it is something that verifies the quality of the journal, that the articles have been reviewed properly over an extended number of years. I think usually 3 or 5 years, usually maybe 4 or 5 years at least, before it gets an impact factor. But the idea is that you can judge this as, a good journal. And equally, if you're a student, you can say, where am I finding information from? Does this journal have a good impact factor? Does it have an impact factor in the first place? Can I therefore rely on some of the articles in a more serious way than some of these other sources I've found that say different things, let's say, about whatever topic you are talking about? So you can read much more from the library around impact factors, citations, all these metrics around research today. But it would be my view if you are planning a research career, you're planning to write, you're planning to do research, let's say for your different courses at postgraduate level, etc., you need to be doing some research on, the publishing industry, the journals. You can't just be citing any particular source. You have to be looking for quality. And just the same way as you do research on a particular topic, you have to start doing research on the quality of publications. We live close by, let's say, to, the United States of America, where fake news is rife, every day. And as researchers, we have to be able to dissect what is real, what is good quality research. And that's why we need to engage with the metrics around research. So one of the first questions I ask myself when I'm doing research is, what am I going to write on? Not always is the case that you have to write the classic research article. You can also write different reports, presentations, other issues around decision-making. They can be in a variety of ways, like short publications. So I've down here, small publications, book reviews, newspapers. For me, too often people spend, they only publish maybe a big article, but there are many other ways of publishing. Some of the best academics I know, they write a book review every year. A book review is where you write to a journal, there may be a big book out in your area, and you say, I have a copy of this book, and I would like to write a book review for your journal. And quite often it is very possible to do that. You can write straight to the book review editor, and that just gets your name out there. An easy way for when people search your name in Google, they will see, yes, this person has already one publication. It is a small book review, but nonetheless, it can be in a very good journal. And it's something, I'm telling you, some of the top researchers in the world still do. Also, just on that point, you have the added benefit that if you contact a publisher and say, I'm going to do a book review in this journal, generally the publisher will send you that book for free. So it's another way of getting a very important book to yourself that you may value a lot, and you can actually get that free and do a book review and get a publication out of it. So there are all sorts of ways of publishing, and that's what I'd encourage you to think of, the different types of publication you may aim for. And when you're planning that research, you need to be thinking, what is the key message you are going to get across? What are you going to say in this article? And just a tip here, too many times when I talk to researchers, they're trying to say 10 things at once. You have to be very clear. What is the key message you want to get across in this publication? And that ties in with the second question. Who is your audience? Who are you trying to target? Is it you're trying to target some of the top professionals, the judiciary? Are you trying to target more, let's say, academic researchers? Are you trying to target a bigger community such as NGOs, some of the criminal prosecution services, etc.? You need to know who your target audience is, and on that basis, where will you publish? If I'm thinking of, I've got an important idea around the reform of a particular legal issue, I might first plan a shorter article, maybe in a newspaper or maybe in a legal professional magazine. And then I may think of developing that. If I think it's a successful idea, if I've got good feedback, I may think of developing that into a longer journal article. So you need to think very much about who is the audience and where do you want to publish. And then in terms of moving on, I'm just going to play a short video, which is a bit of fun, but also identifies about how we should match things up and also how we should approach, let's say, this publishing game. So Emma, if you could let me know that this is audible.
First case, the people of the state
Audible.
of Alabama versus William Robert Gambini and Stanley Marcus Rothenstein. Steve, still just...
Counselor, your clients are charged with first-degree murder. How they plead?
Ayana, my
Don't
client...
talk to me sitting in that chair.
He told me to sit here.
When you're addressing this court, you will rise and speak to me in a clear, intelligible voice.
Sorry. My clients are...
What are you wearing?
Huh?
What are you wearing?
I'm wearing clothes. I don't get the question.
When you come into my court looking like you do, you not only insult me, but you insult the integrity of this court.
I apologize, sir, but this is how I dress.
Next time you come into my courtroom, you will look lawyerly. And I mean, you comb your hair and wear a suit and tie. And that suit better be made out of some kind of cloth. You understand me?
Yes, fine, Judge, fine.
Good, you may continue.
So just to, think about that short video, the idea is, that you need to be thinking where you're publishing and you need to approach those people accordingly. So let's say if you're approaching a journal editor, you're approaching someone in charge of a magazine, you need to be addressing them in a proper way. For example, I am an editor of a journal. I know several other people, and you need to give them the proper title. You can't be saying, dear Mr. Heffron, I want to publish an article in your journal. So there needs to be a realization of what you're aiming for. And what I would say is the second point here, when you're planning research, and let's say you've identified the target research journal or magazine. When you're making, for example, references, you need to show that you actually have read that journal before, that, so ensure that you reference some articles from that journal. Show that, show some respect for that particular academic community, that you are aware that there are certain things that you have to mention, some articles that you should be referencing. If you're talking about a particular area in company law, make sure you're mentioning the classic texts on company law in the region and internationally. So there are certain procedures you have to follow as you write research. Another tip for me would be to say that not every publication has to be a success. You need to know, let's say, when to quit. And too often, for me, people think, I have a great idea, I'm going to keep writing it, and they spend too much time writing on that idea. Research is about gathering those ideas and then over time seeing which is the best one that survives and writing the successful article on that best idea. Another tip in terms of thinking about that little clip I showed you is always, to save yourself some time, always get in touch with the editor, ask them, is the topic suitable? Usually it's best to send them an abstract, a 200 or 300 word summary of your topic and say, look, would this topic be suitable for your journal? I'm preparing an article on this topic. I'll have it ready by June. And I just want to check, would this be suitable for your journal? And generally, editors are courteous enough, they will get back to you and give you an answer. So in terms of directly writing your article, my view would be you break down the article down into different sections and by word count. My advice would be you are breaking it down into 300 word chunks. So a bit like you plan out the article, you may have, for example, you may have something like 30 or 40 chunks of 300 words. And what it means is you can wake up one morning and say, I'm going to write 300 words for that article. And you know, in that 300 words, you have to make this point. Once you hit the 300 words, you know, you should have made your point. If you think you need 500 or 600 words, that's probably too much. You know, you're writing excessively. You know, research writing is about making the point and moving on. And that's why you need to sit down, spend the time, plan out section by section, subsection by subsection, word count for every single section, word count for every single subsection. Writing is about a technique and about doing that technique over and over again. You don't sit down and think, oh, I'm going to write this article very differently from how I did the last time. Writing is a process. Research writing is a process. The faster you learn the technique, the quicker you will begin to write articles, and therefore the faster you will begin to publish. And I would say most articles, the classic research article, which many of you will aspire to write or are already writing or want to continue to write successfully, will be 7,000 to 8,000 words. The best legal journal in the world, the Harvard Law Review, only accepts articles not greater than 11,000 words, including references and footnotes. The last time I checked, that was the case. And my advice to you would be, there is no point writing articles over that. Frankly, publishing has changed. No one is really going to start reading more than that. You know, you want to have the information in, for me, let's say 7,000 to 8,000 words. Plan it out very clearly. As I said, break it down into sections, build it up like a jigsaw. And once you hit 8,000 words, you stop writing. You know, as I said, no one really wants to read more. If you have more than 8,000 words, save the rest for another article. As I said at the start, you have one idea in one article and you push forward that one idea and explain it logically and coherently in that 7,000 to 8,000 words. And you stop at 7,000 or 8,000 words and you revise that 7,000 or 8,000 words to make it better. Do not add to the word count. Keep it at that 7,000, 8,000 words. So my final points would be, make sure as you plan a research career, ask questions, ask advice. Too often people stay in their room, you know, they used to obviously stay in the library, can't do that anymore. So you're even more stuck in your room, writing. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask people advice who you know are writing. Throughout my career, I always asked people who were successful in writing for different tips or different ways of you know, doing things in terms of writing research articles. Another question would be ambitious and also, you know, realistic, but be ambitious. Don't be afraid to target big journals. Get in touch, as I said, with the editors, ask them, you know, begin the dialogue with the research community. And then I leave you with that quote in terms of, you know, to think about for your own ambitions from the great painter, Michelangelo. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dean, for that excellent presentation. I must say I have learned from that. I honestly did not know about approaching journals with an abstract. I thought maybe you had to write the whole thing and then submit and hope for the best, even if you're targeting a journal. So that's very useful to know in terms of directing research, seeing how it will be received. And I'm sure everyone has learned a lot from that presentation, no matter what stage of their career they're at. I see there's a question in the chat from Alexandra Ghani. Are there many barriers students in particular may face when trying to get their work published?
No, I mean, I don't think there are too many barriers. It's about making sure you have the core idea of your article very clearly presented in the abstract, in the introduction. And then it's about getting in touch with different journals. There are more and more journals out there to publish in. Some of them are student-led. You have some student-led journals that accept papers, you know, in America, in Europe. I believe there are also plans, you know, here at the University of West Indies. So there are different avenues. There are also, you know, maybe an underutilized way of publishing is also on these type of legal society blogs. So, for example, you may have an international law society and they have, you know, they accept blog articles. And if you just have a short, impactful piece, maybe of 1,000 or 2,000 words, you know, you can publish there. So there are many places where you can publish. And that's what I would encourage you to think about is, you know, what is this idea I want to publish on? Who would benefit from having this information? And then you look around and see, well, where are all the places that I can publish today? You know, there are so many different ways of publishing. People write short article, you know, short notes on LinkedIn, to blog posts with international groups, you know, to the classic article, to a article with the Student Law Review, to trying to get published in a newspaper. And the Law Association here in Trinidad has started up again and is accepting articles. So there are many places, and I don't think just because you're a student that restricts you. I think, you know, if you have some ambition, you will find a good home for whatever you have written.
Thank you, Dean. And I think in answering that question, you've addressed another question that has just been raised in the chat about how can students increase their credibility as legal writers. I think that question goes beyond students to anybody who's interested in becoming a legal writer. And I would say it in response to Charisse that getting your name out there and being careful with what you publish will be quite key. So of course you want to make sure you're editing anything that you put out there properly. I always recommend letting other people read your work to give you feedback, because once it is out there, you start building your reputation in that manner. But Professor, what are your views on this? How do writers increase their credibility?
Well, I think, you know, practice makes perfect. There will, you know, there will, like anything in life, there will be some ups and downs, but I think you just have to keep practicing. You have to keep trying to get your work out there and build that credibility. And let's say, more and more, you just have to get your work out there because no one else can see your writing or the ideas that are still on your laptop. And that's why I say to you is think about different types of publications. You know, you shouldn't always be thinking about that classic research article. There are many different things you can write, from 500 or 600 word pieces to 1,000, 2,000, up to 7,000 or 8,000. So my advice to you would be, if you want to increase your credibility, start thinking about having a sort of publication profile where someone can look up your name and see, yes, this person writes different things across different types of publication outlets. And that, to me, would be the best way of increasing your credibility as a, you know, let's say a legal writer.
Thank you for that response, Dean. So I see Nicholas Myers has a question. I know he's definitely interested in research. So Nicholas, I will ask you to unmute, and I'll ask anyone else who has questions to please raise your hand at this time or put it in the chat, because we will then go on to the next presentation to keep within our time limit. So Nicholas, you can proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Perot. Good afternoon, Dean. Just confirming that you can hear me.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I enjoyed your presentation a lot. I thought it was quite insightful, especially that bit at the end, which was somewhat simple, but I'd never considered, about breaking your work down into chunks, into 300-word chunks that you could spread throughout the paper into little sections and subsections. And I was just wondering, if you were to take that approach, how would you still keep the paper coherent? How would you make sure that all those different sections cross-reference each other, that it makes sense, you know, that it flows?
Well, that's something you do at the end in that sort of revision process. But if you plan your paper accordingly, it should, let's say, naturally fit together from a logical point of view. And this is something that you will build up once you start doing this over and over again, that you will realize, okay, in my second point here of this paper, which is going to be, 1,000 words, and I break it down into 3 chunks of 300 words each, you then have to get that flow. You realize that as you finish that last 300 words, you should be thinking about the flow into the next 300 words. And that's, again, where you have to develop this capacity to say, what is the point I want to say in this 300 words? What is the second point in the next 300? What is the third in the next 300? And you have to be very clear with yourself. When you're doing research writing, there is no room for fiction writing. And that's what I'd be saying is you need to have this cutoff point. You may have great ideas to tell, but in this paper, you have one idea. And that's why when you get those other ideas maybe popping into your head, you can write them down on a separate document and they can form a different paper. You have to, if you want to do successful research writing, you have to stick to the point. And that's why I say, you stick to the point, you make your arguments that you had planned out, and, you proceed in that way.
Hey, thank you, Dean. So I see another question in the chat. Before that, I just want to answer a question I just saw from Regan, one of our PhD students. Does the faculty have any plans to launch a journal which staff and students can contribute to? Yes, Regan, that is very much on the cards. And as soon as we have more information on that, Dr. Alfonso is heading that. We will distribute that to everyone because we are planning a launch. So do look out for that. The next question is, what advice would you give to alumni who have been out of the classroom for a while, but would like to begin writing on the issues in their respective fields? So Dean, I think this goes to people who might have gone into practice and might not have been doing academic writing recently. Is there anything they should consider in terms of approaching their work? And I think from my perspective, perhaps practice notes in terms of case notes might be a good place to start, but I'd love to hear your perspective, Dean.
Exactly. I think if you've been out in practice and you want to, let's say, get back to writing, my advice would be to start small. Get your name out there first of all. Don't overburden yourself. And I would say start small. You can write a short case note for a journal. You can write a short book review for a journal. You can do, let's say, a special topic, something, of 1,000 words for a journal. You can also do things, Justin has put in there, like a blog post, as I said before, for different groups. But I would say, try and start off with a small piece of maybe 600 to, let's say, 1,000 words. And once you have that written, it can be a book review, it can be, for a blog, it can be, as I said, or, for a case note, or a special topic on a journal. Many academic journals will accept, special topics where you say, look, this particular issue is very, very important across the Caribbean at the moment, and I think it deserves, a 1,000 or 2,000 special topic review article in your journal, and they may be open for that if you ask the journal editor in a professional way. So my view, there are many ways to get published. If you're already out practicing for some period of time and you want to get back in, start off small, and I'm sure that can build you a good pathway for success.
Thank you very much, Dean. So I'm now going to take the final question from Mr. Eden Charles. So Mr. Charles, you can feel free to unmute. and ask your question. I'd just like to let everyone know that if there are things you would like to hear about in future research seminar series, maybe a whole issue that you'd like to be discussed, do feel free to email me with your suggestions. I have put my email address in the chat, and I am very open to suggestions as to how we can proceed with more seminars. So Mr. Charles, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Emma. Good afternoon, Dean and students. Sorry for joining late. I had classes from 9 to 12. So I would have missed most of what the Dean has said, but I wonder whether the Dean has commented on what I'm going to say or would like to make a comment on what I'm going to say. There are a number of organizations which have ongoing work in terms of treaty texts in several areas of international law, climate change, international trade law, law of the sea, sustainable development law, and so on. So I'm thinking that these organizations request not only comments on their articles, their drafts from member states and IGOs and the governmental organizations, but they also accept comments on their texts from civil society and academia. Students are seen as part of that as well. So I want to know whether the Dean would be in agreement that students should also consider making comments on these draft articles in the National Law Commission and so on, as a view to enhancing their visibility and their writing skills and styles, and by doing so, contributing to global governance and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Eden, for that point. And I think for me, that's that's an excellent point. That is another way of contributing in terms of publications, getting your name out there. And for me, definitely contributing to any type of even local, national, international consultations, I would encourage it. It's something a lot of legal academics already do, and it's another way of, if you like, publishing. And that's why I say, when you think of publishing, you should be thinking of it in a very, very broad way. And, as academic or legal writers, professional legal writers, there are great opportunities to make an impact. And the one Eden has just talked about is another way to contribute to local, national, international debates on particular issues. And definitely I would encourage that.
Okay, thank you, Dean, for that excellent presentation and for answering the questions. So I am now going to proceed with my presentation on organizing your research. So let me just put up my screen. So you can see I'm dealing with two screens. So just getting my PowerPoint up. All right, so just confirming that my screen can be seen and you are seeing a slide saying organizing your research.
Seeing and hearing you, Laura.
Great, thank you, Malcolm. Okay, so my presentation is perhaps a bit less exciting than the Dean's presentation, which talks about how you get into publishing, what things you should be considering. Mine is very practical in terms of, it's about organizing your research. Now, organizing, I think, is something that saves a lot of time in the long run when you're actually writing, but it does take time to do it. Now, why I'm speaking on this is because I found over the years that there are certain pitfalls that can be avoided when you are organizing. These tips I will be sharing are fairly simple tips. They're nothing particularly technical. They're things anybody can do. And they're things I wish I had known once I started my law degree, because I think it would have made my life a lot easier, especially as I progressed in my different stages. And they are things that help me now that I am entering the world of academic publishing as an early career researcher. So I'm going to be sharing things that you should do, as well as mistakes that should be avoided. So in today's presentation, I'm going to be looking at referencing tools, naming folders and drafts, database accounts, note-taking, planning, and of course, backup. So the first thing I want to talk about is referencing tools. I don't think anyone here has a great love of manually entering references. And while this is an important practice when you are in undergrad to get that experience, because you do need to understand Scholar fully or whatever referencing tool you're using in your jurisdiction, for example, Chicago Blue Book in the US, when you understand what you are doing, you can then use referencing software. So there are several types of referencing software available. Personally, I use EndNote. The reason I use this is simply because this software is available for free at King's College London, where I did my PhD, and it's available at the University of West Indies right now. It's available to students as well under the My UE Secure area. There's also Zotero and Mendeley. So there are different types of services you can use. Some are subscription-based and some are free. But the real benefit of these things is that you can import references directly to your software from a database. So for example, on Hein Online, you are able to directly import that into the database, into the referencing software, and it formats everything for you. You may have to import the Scholar formatting, but that is easy to do. And then your reference is saved already in Scholar format. You should really be doing all this in the beginning when you're gathering your research, because I think what tends to happen is we'll have our research, we'll have all our articles, we might make a note, okay, this is from this, but when it comes to do the referencing, that is very time consuming. But if we had it all already there, we can save a lot of time. In this referencing software, you can even rate the articles, you can group between read and unread, and you can cite as you go, because some of them have integrated tools with Microsoft Word. So I think referencing software is probably the most useful thing I learned while doing my PhD, and it's something I use now. You can create different libraries in your referencing software, and it's really, really helpful in terms of keeping all your sources organized. Naming folders. This is particularly useful for larger projects when you have maybe different themes that you're exploring and different issues that you're looking at. So in terms of naming folders, let's say you have 3 main themes you're looking at in an article. You can name your folders according to that theme. Using colored tabs can help you distinguish between folders, and then using numbers can help you make a sequence. So for example, let's say section 1 of your article is going to be on X theme. You can have 1, then X. In that folder, you can have your drafts, you can have the articles, you can have any notes that you've taken, and you can make a folder to match that in the referencing software. And that helps you keep everything in line. Always keep all your drafts, and you might want to have a folder with a copy of your drafts, even if the drafts are in your themed folders, because you want every version of your draft possible. Do not make the mistake of just using one piece of one Word document, and then just writing over that, because you might find your ideas change with time. But having your drafts will help you when you go back and think, oh, actually, this point was better than I thought. I want to keep it. Or maybe you don't want to proceed with the point, but in a later article, you think, you know, I wrote something about this somewhere else, but I deleted that draft because it wasn't good at the time. Keep your drafts, name them, date them. And I would suggest putting your most recent draft in capital letters or some kind of different color tab to distinguish it, because what you don't want to do is submit a draft that is not your final draft. So be very careful in terms of naming, but naming really can help you organize everything. Database accounts. Database accounts vary from provider to provider, but many databases do have accounts where you can create your own personal account in addition to your institutional account, and then you can save articles there. Now, this is beneficial because they will be stored there. They can be stored under a theme which matches your folder, which matches the library you've named on your referencing software. So you see, it's all really matching up nicely here. I think somebody's mic might be on. Just please mute your mic at this time. You can also save sources that you think, well, I don't necessarily need this now, but I might want to come back to this in the future. And you can save it there rather than saving it on your computer. It might make it easier for you to organize. You can also directly download multiple sources and citations if you do this. If you make your account, you can download the citations and import them directly depending on the functionality of the database. So this also ties into your referencing software. Note-taking, I think, is also very important. It is time well spent. Now, when I say note-taking, I think the inclination for many of us is to highlight our PDFs. Personally, I like different colors. I like to use certain colors for cases, different points, etc. But I also think it's very important to take notes in a Word document. Now, of course, all these tips I am sharing is based on my personal view. It might be helpful for some and not for others. But what I have found is that 9 out of 10 times when you're dealing with a lot of PDFs and you're just highlighting and making comments on the PDF, when it comes time to actually referring to that source, you can't necessarily remember which PDF you used, and you might want to review that point again. So what I recommend, and this is time consuming, is having a Word document. You put the name of your source at the top, and then you start taking your notes. You can take them in your own words, or you can also copy quotations, but of course, be sure to use quotation marks. And the key thing here is putting the page number. So when you see, oh, okay, I remember I read this article and there was a great point on the post-mortem right of publicity. Where did I read that again? So you have your article in the Word document, you have the page numbers and you say, ah, yes, it was page 56 to 58. I go back there and I refresh my memory. And especially over a long period of time, I find this can be very helpful. Now, again, it does add time to the process, but I think in the long run, it saves you time compared to having to go back through all the journal articles. Another thing I would recommend if you're dealing with a lot of articles would be to use a software like NVivo. That software allows you to upload multiple PDFs and it allows you to do coding. Now, coding is essentially grouping certain themes based on categories you decide. But let's say you know there's a certain term that you're looking for in all journal articles. So you have 20 journal articles and you're looking for the term post-mortem right of publicity. That software will highlight every single article and every occurrence of that term. So that is not the only one available. There's also QDA Minor and of course lots of software available. QDA Minor is actually the one that UE has a license for. That is helpful if you're dealing with a lot of journal articles. So note taking, I really recommend. You can even also add the notes onto your referencing software, combine them with your PDFs, so you have it all together. Planning. Now, the dean talked about this planning. He talked about the 300-word chunks, so making your aims and making things realistic. Now, I think planning is very important because deadlines do make us work. When we know we have set out to achieve something, we are more likely to do it than if we give ourselves a very long time to do it. So if we give ourselves 1 week to do something versus 1 month, many of us will probably just work to that deadline. So being realistic with how much time you actually need can be very helpful. Because I think, as you realize, research can be very time consuming. Those of you who are experienced researchers know this. Research is not a short, simple thing, especially if you want to produce quality research. I think you can only do so much intense thinking in a day. So this thing where you're sitting at the computer for hours is neither healthy nor productive. And this is where planning comes in. You want to make a realistic plan. So I think if you're entering a new topic, you want to think, well, how long will it take me to get a basic understanding of this topic that I'm not familiar with? It won't take that long if you already know the ins and outs, but if you're entering something completely new, you have to account for that. And then how long will it take you to get an advanced understanding? So if you're going into in-depth analysis, you need to account for the complex concepts that you will have to consider. And always remember that you will find additional sources while you are reading. So you might have downloaded, let's say, initially 20 journal articles. I can guarantee that when in those journal articles, you're going to find loads of cases you need. Those cases will reference other cases. The journal articles might reference books, etc. So you have to account for following the footnotes and getting even more sources. Make a timeline for writing. So however much you think is realistic per day. But also in this timeline, make time for editing, because I think editing always takes more time than we think it's going to take, and editing is very important. I'd also recommend in your editing that you account for time to let the work rest, because we get so accustomed when we're working on a document over and over and over that we predict what the next sentence is. We predict our points. The problem with this is that we then can't really see where the improvements should be made. We can't see things like errors, and we can't see the different perspective that might be out there. So always leave time for editing and put more time than you think it will take, because editing is very key and it is very time consuming. My computer just seems to have frozen on that slide. Let me just manually change it. Right, so the final thing is backup. Now, backup is very key to avoid any potential mental breakdowns. We've all been online for the past 2 years, but I have had an experience, both on my PhD and my undergrad, where you hear a cry of anguish raised from the room. And that is because, in the first instance, somebody lost an entire essay an hour before the deadline. In the PhD room, it was because somebody lost an entire chapter. Now, when your work is not backed up, and I must say this is something I actually need to improve on, when your work is not backed up and something goes wrong with your device or anything like that, you are going to be very distressed. So there's different methods of backing up. So you can use cloud storage, a physical external hard drive, you can email yourself. But whatever you do, make sure you're backing up. And based on how technology works, you know that things are most likely to fail near a deadline. We know that the printer stops working, the printer starts to panic and decides it's not going to print. We know that the internet goes right as you're about to submit. We know all these things happen. So do back up your work in some type of way so you can avoid that cry of anguish that will come out of you when you realize your work has been lost. So all these things are very basic tips, but I think they have been helpful for the things I've used over the course of years to really kind of make my life easier. Now, these things are time consuming, but I think if you use them, when it comes down to writing, it will make your life much easier and you can produce high quality work without having to spend time going back and forth through your various sources and trying to figure out what was the reference again, which page was this on, and all the questions we ask ourselves when writing. So simple, but it has been effective for me. And I'm sure as you develop through your research career, you will come up with your own methods that work best for you. So at this time, I'll ask if anyone has any questions and just allow me to pull back up the chat. Malcolm, I see your hand was raised. Sorry, I'm just pulling back up the Zoom part on my side.
Yes, Doctor.
Yes.
Go ahead or wait until they finish.
You can go ahead because I have to just pull back up the Zoom on my side because I'm using 2 screens, so I can't see the participants list right now. So you go ahead in the meantime because I got the notification for your hand.
Okay. Do you have any tips for taking all these tips on planning and being able to transfer it into the discipline to write? Because that's a real thing. Like planning is always lovely. It works really well when you plan really good, but then the discipline to sit and go through all of this to write the actual article, it takes a lot.
Yes, discipline to write is something that I think there's no easy answer to this, Malcolm, because when you start your research and your planning, you're probably really excited, but then you get into all the work and you probably get a bit fed up at times. So I think accounting for that in your timeline and taking proper breaks is important. While we do legal writing, it doesn't mean we don't need inspiration in the same way that perhaps a fictional writer would need or an artist would need. You need to feel inspired to write, and you need to remember why you're doing this in the first place. It has to be that you enjoy the topic you chose, unless of course you're doing a compulsory assignment, and that's a different story. But for those of us who are doing writing because we want to do it, we are researchers, we're pursuing a research career path even, we have to remember why we want to do it, and we have to inspire ourselves. So I think writing a note in the beginning as to why you want to do this and what you're hoping to achieve is worthwhile. It's something you should come back to. But ultimately, Malcolm, if you find that you're not feeling inspired on a certain day, I wouldn't pressure yourself. I would try to do something fun, take a break, and you'll find that that joy comes back to you. Because this working 24/7 is something that can suck the joy out of what we usually like doing. I also find sometimes there's a hesitation to start. And I think this is because in law, as researchers, we want to be perfect nearly. We are afraid of failure, we are afraid of rejection, and we feel as though we have to have the perfect thing to start. So just getting there and start writing is usually the best way to go, as in just put something on the page, whether it's a line or two, your brain will eventually start to get into it. And of course, this is just what I think personally, but I always find that if I sit down and just start anything, even writing down jotted notes on what I plan to do, that really helps. Similarly, I like to work with a research plan. So once I know what I want to do, I plan out an article, and then I keep on referring back to that if there's any changes or whatnot, so I can see where I am going. So yes, it is a hard thing, Malcolm, but it is something you have to realize does take time, and sometimes you do need a break from it. I saw you said a break in law in the comments, but yes, to have an effective approach to writing, I do think we need to take breaks and let our minds rest so we can regain the inspiration. I saw Alicia in the chat ask, can I reshare the name of the software I mentioned to help with document analysis? Alicia, the name of that software is NVivo, so it's common N, capital V, I-V-O. But there's also QDA minor, so that's capital Q, capital D, capital A, M-I-N-E-R. So those are examples of software that you can use to analyze a large amount of documents. Alex, I see your hand is up.
Yes, Dr. Perot. So just before you ended off, you spoke about making time for editing. And I was wondering, do you think that there's such a thing as over editing, and how would you avoid that?
Okay, Alex, that's a really good question. It's something I have suffered with myself, transitioning from the PhD to academia. And the reason for this, in my personal experience, is that in the PhD, we do many, many drafts of chapters. So you're always perfecting, always doing drafts. But what I have learned, and it's something that I think is hard to accept, is that you will never achieve perfection. This is why it's so hard to get that A+ for students in law. It's hard to get a first-class honors or anything like that. You'll never achieve perfection. In fact, even if you get those types of grades, it's still not going to be perfect. There will always be room for improvement. Somebody will always read your work and think this could have been better. I have a different view. I could refute this in these ways. So you have to be comfortable with coming to a certain standard. Once you think this is a high enough quality, it is reflective of the standard that you are putting forward to whatever publication it is, be it a blog, a newspaper, an academic journal. Once you think that the standard is reflective of other things that have been published, you have to accept that, okay, I have met my goal, I need to move on now. And if it is that it doesn't get accepted, that is just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. As the dean mentioned, not every article is going to be a success. It doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't well done. It could be that it just didn't fit with the theme of the publication. It could be that there was some that they preferred over yours. But it's about accepting that and moving forward rather than dwelling on it. So you do have to tell yourself, okay, I have done what I can do. There will always be room for improvement, but this is good enough to meet the standard that I have set for myself compared against the other publications in the source that I am publishing in. Okay, so I see it is 1 o'clock. Do we have any further questions? I know the dean is still here, but I think he has to leave for a meeting very shortly. So now is the time. Please raise your hand if you have any final questions, or do type it in the chat now, as I know people have to leave at this point. Okay, so just in case anybody's typing in the chat this time, I'd like to thank you all for turning out, for supporting this first seminar in our research seminar series. We do have another one next week, actually. So the schedule for that is available to UE students through their email, or at least it will be. For those of you who got the information through LinkedIn, it is also available on my LinkedIn. For those of you who signed up to the mailing list, you will be sent the schedule. So do look out for it next week. We have Roberto Bassi from Heart coming to speak to us, as well as Sarah Harris from GIPLIP, which is an IP journal. They will be speaking about how to turn your PhD into a monograph, as well as how to write a good journal article, respectively. So that's going to be a very useful experience for us all. And of course, we have a great lineup of speakers this semester, so do keep an eye on that. So I'm not seeing any further questions, so I must thank the Dean for turning out and making some very useful contributions. Of course, we know he's extremely busy, but we appreciate his wisdom and his expertise being shared. Thank you all who have supported this initiative, and I hope to see you in future seminars. This recording will be posted to our YouTube page in due course, and you will get an email about that, and the link will be posted on our various social media. So have a good day, everyone, and look forward to seeing you in future installments of our seminar series.